Hello and welcome to this series on the Dharma Shastras. The idea of this series is to unpack and explore the purpose and relevance of the Dharma Shastras in the present context. In doing so, we are also attempting to answer some of the questions and issues around the Dharma Shastras and answer them as candidly and as openly as possible. Debate and discussion are intrinsic to the very ethos of our Dharma. And in this series, we attempt to do exactly that. While Nitin Sridhar, Chief Curator of the Advaita Academy, would be the primary speaker, the plan is also going forward to include a larger range of speakers and experts who will share their views and opinions on these topics. Please feel free to share your questions and opinions and feedback. It will keep us on our toes. Thank you. Nitin, as part of what we're trying to do in the dialogues on the Dharma Shastra, one of the questions, the idea is that we need to, the context, as I said, is about it's important for us to address some of the dissenting voices, some of the questions that seem to be coming, even from people who are within the same Hindu fold itself, if you want to call it, and who have started to believe and who have started to push this narrative that Dharma Shastras are no longer relevant, particularly in a modern ecosystem. And, that Hindus would be better off if they give up the Dharma Shastras, the argument being that, the Dharma Shastras discriminate against people from the same, this one and all of those things. So this entire series of dialogues, and I want to thank you for, coming on board and doing this, is to try to, one is unpack what the Dharma Shastras say, also discuss the relevance of the Dharma Shastras in today's context, and also try to make meaning out of what they are saying, the true meaning, and why they continue to be relevant. That is the whole purpose. And so many of the questions that I ask would be from the role of a devil's advocate kind of a thing, where I will pose questions that seem to appear like they are questioning the very fundamentals, and some of the questions might also be simplistic, and I'm also looking to crowdsource many of the questions as we go forward. So that is the basic idea. So I will start with the first question. And for the sake of the recording, I will say today is March 28th, and this is episode 1 of this dialogues on the Dharma Shastras with Nitin Sridhar. And the first question that we have is, if the Vedas are pradhana, if since the Vedas are the source of everything, what is the need for the Dharma Shastras? So therefore, why have the Dharma Shastras at all? And what purpose do they serve in the scheme of things in the whole landscape of Sanatana Dharma? So that is the question that we have first.
Thank you, Ramesh, for inviting me. I'm very glad to be here, glad to answer the questions. To the best of my knowledge, I must clarify, I'm not a scholar of Dharma Shastra per se. I'm not a traditional Vidwan of Dharma Shastra. My study of Dharma Shastra has been purely out of my personal interest and my Shraddha in tradition and Shraddha in Shastra. So now, with this
In
caveat,
one way, it is good that way, because if you have two traditional Shastraik person, then they also get into some sort of a, they get straight jacketed into only one view. So it's good to have a person who is also part of the this one, who's not really fully into it, but is also fully understands it from both sides. So in that sense, it is good to
yes,
have you on that.
in a sense, my own journey has been from the position of skepticism and perhaps criticism to a position of appreciation and acceptance. So, okay. So, with that caveat, your question, this is a very fundamental question. A lot of people ask. Especially today, we have this tendency to say that Bhagavad Gita is everything. When we have Bhagavad Gita, why
Mm.
do we need Manusmriti? Why do we need
Yeah.
any other thing? But this question is fundamentally problematic. The question itself is problematic. It is like saying, since Veda is ultimate, why do we need Ramayana? Since Bhagavad Gita is ultimate so-called Bible of Hindu Dharma, then why do we need the rest of the Mahabharata? Why do we need Itihasa Puranas? Why do we need Natya Shastra? Why do we need Kavya Shastra? Why do we need anything, Artha Shastra, anything? Since ultimately we say that in Hindu tradition, we believe that all knowledge has its source in Veda. So that Veda, in whatever sense, because as a practicing Hindu, we do not consider Veda as just the 4 books, the text printed books called Rig Veda, Yajur Veda. That naming itself is modern.
Correct.
We have the Veda Shakas, Shaka Parampara, wherein it's not 4 printed texts of Rig Veda, Yajur Veda. So this question itself is problematic. The reason is obvious that the same truth, why do we have this diversity of text? It is obvious that to any discriminating, I'm using discrimination in a positive sense, any
Yeah, so
discerning mind,
discerning mind, maybe, yeah.
any mind with vivekam, that is why I'm clarifying with the Sanskrit term. It is very obvious that the same truth has been conveyed in numerous ways using diverse teaching methodologies so that they can reach one and all, because no 2 person is same. I and you are not same. Our attitudes are different. Our competencies are different. Our interests are different. Our temperaments is different. So since there is so much diversity in people's nature, people's capacities and all, so the teachings, the ultimate reality, it may be the Paramarthika Satya, the absolute reality about Brahman, about Ishvara, or it is a reality about the Srishti, the world around us. They have been conveyed in different ways. That is why we have the diversity of darshanas. We have Nyaya, we have Sankhya, we have Vaisheshika, we have Mimamsa. All of them, though are independent darshanas, they are actually, they're part of a integrated whole. So that is why we have, though the Veda is the ultimate pramana. See, there are, we can classify, if I have to classify the teachings of the Veda, it is twofold. One is dharma, the other is moksha. That is what is the karma khanda and jnana khanda portion is all about. And in between is also upasana khanda. If we have to divide it into 3 types, then dharma, upasana, moksha. But usually upasana khanda can be classified within moksha itself because it is also part of that. So there is dharma and there is moksha. This is the twofold goal, twofold teachings of Vedas. And this same teachings have been elaborated and have been contextualized further in different texts. For example, Smritis. Smritis elaborate on the dharma aspect. Then we have Upanishads and certain Vedantic texts which specifically focus upon the moksha aspect. Mimamsa Darshana likewise focuses on the dharma aspect. We have Itihasa Puranas which have systematized and which provide us both the teachings of dharma and moksha in a very colorful manner, with all the stories and everything, all masala put into it, right? So as I don't remember the exact text or who has said it, but as somebody, one of our ancestors, great scholar, has said, the Smritis, the teachings of the Smritis, the way it conveys the dharma that is in the Veda, it conveys as a father or a teacher who gives instructions to a student. That is, it gives proper instructions in the form of injunctions and prohibitions. You do this, you don't do this. Doing this will give you punyam. Doing this will give you papam. This leads to sukha. This leads to dukkha. This is good for you. This is bad for you. So that is how, you teach like a father or a teacher teaching a small child with discipline. The same content is then taught by Itihasa Purana the way a friend gives timely advice. A friend does not tell you that you have to do this, do that. This is not. He advises you. Look, if you do like this, then it may lead to this result. And if you do like this, it may lead to some different result. So just like that story from Janaka or somebody who did. So that is how the Panchatantra and all is there. No? So that is how Itihasa Purana says. On the other hand, we have Kavya Shastra and all who teach the same dharma and moksha with all color and love and everything added, the way a beloved talks to the lover, way the spouses talk to each other. So that is how the Kavyas convey the teaching. But consider this. This is one thing. This is one part of my answer. About why, even though Vedas is Pradhana, Dharma Shastra and every other text. Because if we today say that Dharma Shastra is not needed because Veda is Pradhana, then tomorrow we can say Itihasa Puranas are also not needed. Then we can say that all the works of our Acharyas from Shankaracharya, Ramanujacharya, and every other Acharyas up till today, it is not needed. Then we are actually we are Abrahamizing Hindu Dharma. We are actually Islamizing Hindu Dharma. That we have one text written or composed or given at some point in history, and that is it. That is the end of it. So we have kind of reducing Hindu Dharma, Hindu textual tradition from a living tradition to a tomb of history, to a grave of history. So we need to be very careful about this. That is how where this answer, this question leads us to. But this is one part of it. Yeah.
There seems to be an echo that is coming every time I speak. I'm wondering if it's coming from your end or no. Your audio is fine. I think.
Okay.
When I say okay, I think there's a feedback from your system sometime later. Okay. But it's okay. I think. Okay. Yeah. No, I think it's okay. So I think we can continue.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Fine. So this was the first part of my answer to that question. I have a few more aspects to add to this.
Right.
Now let us consider what Veda is. I mean, we say that Veda is Pradhana, and it is Pradhana. In fact, Manusmriti itself says that Vedo Akhilam Dharma Moolam. The Mula, the root of Dharma, the foundation of Dharma is the immutable, the Akhila Veda. However, what is Veda in a traditional understanding? As I said, it's not a printed book. Veda available to us is through Veda Shakas, right? And what is directly available to us, the Veda Shakas which are directly available to us is today, is a very, very small portion of the Veda Shakas constituted by Vyasa in the Veda Pravachana Parampara. So what Veda we have today is thanks to the Pravachana Parampara started by Vyasa. He taught his 4 major students, and then from there different Shakas were branched out. Some thousands plus shakas were there. I think within Samaveda itself, there were 1,000 plus shakas.
I think, yeah, Sama had several other. I think most of it is now lost.
Yes. So 90% of the shakas are less. We have left with only some 24 shakas combined of all the Rig Veda, Yajur Veda, Samaveda, and Atharvaveda. So most of it have been lost. So what this means is, we do not actually have direct access to the entirety of Veda. And if we have to take the Shastric self-claim, the claim of the Shastra or the position of the Shastra, then Shastra says that Veda is infinite. Vedic Shakas are innumerable in them. There are innumerable branches originally. It's not just 1,000 or 2,000. There are infinite number of branches. So there is no way that we have the entirety of Veda in front of us. So while it is true that Veda is ultimate pramana, it is the only independent source of knowledge about dharma and moksha. There is no doubt about it. But we do not have access to 99% of the Veda. So this is the reality.
Yeah, right? The one thing that I wanted to bring in the same context, even as you unpack this, is one of the arguments that is made and made consistently is this, that the Vedas are, Anadi and Apurusha. In the sense, it is a direct, they say it is the breath of Narayana himself, or you are depending on the breath of God itself, if you want to say. And therefore, it is, since it doesn't have since it is timeless as well as eternal as well as this one, it's a direct this one. Whereas the argument that is being made, and I'm sure you will address that also, is that the Shastras, the Dharma Shastras, and all of these things are essentially man-made because they're interpretations of the eternal truths that are already presented in the Vedas, and therefore subject to geography, subject to time, subject to all of these things, and therefore since they are neither eternal nor are they divine in one sense, using the word divine here, it is therefore is the argument is made that their relevance can be questioned, their relevance, and therefore we can make attempts to not only do away with them, if not do away with them, at least make some sort of changes to the Shastras to make them more relevant. That is also an argument that is being made.
Okay, nice question. I will come to that eventually.
Right.
And my next point that I'm making partially addresses. So, yeah, that is a very important question. We will take it up definitely. As I was saying, the fact is the directly visible, the Pratyaksha Veda with us is very small portion of the rest of the Veda, right? So this is the ground reality. So what should we do? How do we fill this gap? This is where the Smritis, the Itihasas and Puranas, especially the Smritis, come. Their purpose is to fill this gap. These Smritis, Itihasa, Puranas, these are the texts which have been composed, which have been given to us by our Rishi ancestors, not some Tom, Dick and Harry. They have been composed by Rishis such as Vyasa, such as Manu, Yagyavalkya, and so many others. So these rishis were themselves omniscient. See, who is a rishi? Rishi is a mantradrashta. A rishi is someone who knows the past, present, and the future. And rishi is one who has directly perceived the Veda through his yogic powers. It is not just, he is not only well versed in Veda in the conventional sense in the Guru Shishya Parampara, but through his Tapobalam, he has directly perceived Veda in its entirety. In fact, Manu Smriti in the very opening 4 verses, it specifically says, the questionnaires address, the questioning rishis address Manu Maharaj, the Swayambhuva Manu, as saying, Asya Sarvasya, you who are the knower of entirety of Veda. Entirety of Vidhana. Vidhana means Veda.
Right.
So he specifically says, what does this entirety means? Entirety means the Pratyaksha Veda as well as the Anumaya Veda. That which can be inferred. All the branches, everything included. So these Smritis, Itihasa, Puranas, but specifically Smritis, they are given to us by the Rishis and they fill the gap. They can be understood as inferred Veda, right? Because it is written by those Rishis who directly perceived Veda, who had a deep knowledge of Veda and its many, many branches. And based on that, they have composed their Shastras, right? The Smritis and others. So this is whether you call it interpretation or whatever, their authenticity is beyond doubt as far as the tradition is capable. The Mimamsa in fact holds that these teachings, therefore, being directly based upon Veda, they are understood as Anumeya Veda. The Smritis are called as Anumeya Veda. That is, the teachings in the Smritis can be understood as having a basis in Veda. That is, they are revealing what the Vedas itself says. So they are providing, the Smritis are providing us access to those portions of Veda to which we no longer have access.
Okay, so not just, right. So they are providing access to the gaps that exist in the Vedas one.
The point is that our direct access to the direct Veda which are present in front of us is very small portion. Right. We don't have the direct access to large portion. But these Smritis which are composed by the Rishis many years ago, many millennia years ago, we don't know when. And they have been continuously redacted also. Manusmriti in its original format contains 100,000 chapters. We don't have that much today. So the point is, it is the teachings of the Rishis, and they based it directly upon Veda. And these Rishis, they are not normal humans. They don't write something because of their they are not affected by kama, krodha, moha, or somebody, they like somebody or they don't like dislike is not there. So they are purely basing their teachings upon Veda. I am speaking about only the Vaidika Smritis, right?
Right.
Right. So this is so basically the Mimamsa position is that the Smritis are Anumeya Veda. They are whatever Smritis has given, we have to consider them as being based upon the Veda, which is not directly visible to us. Therefore, their Vedic basis has to be inferred. Anumana Prakriya, using Anumana, we have to infer them. It is for this reason Smritis and other Dharma Shastras are very much relevant to us today, because they give us the knowledge which is having the same standing as that of Veda.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, sorry, no, because I thought at that point I will ask this question. Since the argument also is made, and I'm only reflecting the arguments that continuously keep coming up. One is that if we are admitting that the Manu Shastra itself or any of those things have been redacted, changed, reviewed, revised several times, and what we have now. So why is it that we are reluctant to, for example, revise certain sections of it? Certain sections that, quote unquote, are called problematic, or to use modern terminology, discriminatory against certain sections of the society. So why is it that we are so reluctant? Why are we? When I say we, when I say the so-called, the Brahmanical view is why do we want to protect all of these discriminatory verses, going by the history of it having been revised or redacted, or and all of those things? Why do we refuse to allow it to happen now?
Okay, right. I think this is again a follow-up question to what you previously asked, and
Yes.
about whether the Smritis need to be redacted, modified, or certain things need to be, changed in them or discarded. So I think we'll come to that once we establish the importance of Veda, the importance of
No, I
the
just slipped in this
Smritis.
question primarily
Yes.
because that came in, you
Yes,
spoke
and
about,
I will
yeah.
take it up because that has a
Right.
very long answer that needs
Correct.
to be dealt with completely. But before I do with it, I want to add one more aspect to this issue about why Dharma Shastras are relevant to us. We need to take a step back here and let us start from basics. What is a Dharma Shastra? It has two words, Dharma and Shastra, right? Dharma, let us not go into the definition of it. Basically, Dharma is that which upholds us, all the actions that can give us Abhyudaya Nishreyasa, the overall well-being, material, spiritual, all kinds of well-being is Dharma, right? Now, Shastra, what is a Shastra? Shastra is any treatise which reveals knowledge about some field. Say, for example, a textbook, a treatise on physics reveals knowledge about physics. So that textbook on physics is a Shastra about physics. Similarly, Dharma Shastra is a book or a text or a sentences, bunch of sentences put together, which reveals knowledge about Dharma. You cannot say that I will consult chemistry or biology textbook to gain knowledge about physics, right? Similarly, to gain knowledge about Dharma, you have to consult Dharma Shastra. So what are the primary Dharma Shastras? The two most important Dharma Shastra is Veda and Smriti. And then comes Itihasa, Puranas. And if we have to put an internal hierarchy, then the Vedas is the first, then comes the Smritis, and only then Itihasa Puranas comes. So Smritis is higher than Itihasa Puranas. So you cannot simply do away with Smritis and then say that I am speaking for Dharma. Because Dharma, we know what is Dharma, what is not Dharma, from the Smritis, from the Vedas and from the Smritis, and the Itihasa Puranas, of course. So let me give an example. And this, it is important to highlight here that what the Smritis and the Vedas reveal through their words, through their sentences, the Shabda Gyan that they give, this knowledge about Dharma cannot gain from any other sources. That is, we have different pramanas such as Pratyaksha, Anumana, Upamana, etc. Basically, Pratyaksha means direct perception, Anumana means logical inference, upamana is analogy and other things. They cannot reveal this knowledge. And what I mean by this, I'll give a small example that will make it clear. We all know that sexual intimacy is an important part of marriage, and we all indulge in it. We don't need any book or any text to tell about it. Fine. But it is Smritis alone which reveal this knowledge that on what days having sexual intimacy is auspicious, gives us punyam, and on what days having sexual intimacy is inauspicious, it gives us papam. Punyam leads to sukha, happiness, and papa is the karmic demerit, it leads to dukkha, unhappiness. Right? Punya is karmic merit, papa is karmic demerit. This knowledge that certain actions leads to karmic merit or punyam, and certain which in turn results in sukha or happiness, and certain certain action leads to papam, which in turn leads to dukkha or unhappiness. Punya leads to sukha, swarga, punarjanma. Dukkha leads to papa leads to dukkha and naraka and again punarjanma. So this knowledge is not available to us from any other source. We cannot see that swarga exists. We cannot see what is punya, what is adrishta. We cannot see all these things. We cannot see the how the karmic fruits will come to us. This is not possible for us to pratyaksha. We cannot infer it therefore, right? So this knowledge comes to us from Veda primarily because Veda is the independent source, independent Shabda Pramana. And based on Veda, we have other texts such as Smritis, Itihasa, and Puranas. Of them, the Smritis are most important because their sole purpose is to teach Dharma. Itihasa and Puranas have a wider purpose. They teach Dharma, they also teach Moksha, they also teach about the different darshanas. They include about Nyaya Darshana also, Vaisheshika also, they include about Vedanta also, everything they include, right? So therefore, the place of Smritis and Dharma Shastra in Hindu scheme of things is that of a Shabda Pramana. Shabda Pramana means the source of knowledge which is in the form of words and sentences, which alone reveals knowledge about Dharma, what Dharma is and what Adharma is.
And in one sense, the Vedas also are Shabda Pramana in that sense.
Vedas are the primary
Shabda Pramana. And yes. Additionally, maybe we could also say that since the Vedas were revealed to rishis, it is not like although they were eternal, they had to be revealed to somebody, the seer, yes, the person who saw this one. And therefore, in that sense, if many of these people are also, there is an Apta Pramana also in the sense for the Dharma Shastras, because they have been, if you want to call it codified or written down from the same people who have also, in a sense, seen these eternal truths.
Yes, definitely. I mean, you see, in the Veda Parampara that has been codified, that has been given by Vyasa, the Veda themselves says that what Manu says is like a medicine. You may not like it sometimes, but it is very good for you. So the Shruti itself is saying that what Manu says is authentic. The point here is, who is Manu? Who is the author of this, the Manu Dharma Shastra? He is Swayambhava Manu. He is the son of Brahma. And the Manusmriti says that knowledge of Dharma was first given by Brahma himself to Manu. And then Manu composed the text of Manu Dharma Shastra based on that knowledge. I have an entire essay on the question of authorship, authorial voice, and all, and on wherein I have actually dealt with these questions. I think you also asked about authorship, and also let me just briefly mention this. The present text we have is around has around 2,600 plus verses. But we have the evidence from Narada Smriti which recounts the transmission of Manu Dharma Shastra. And within the text of Manu also we have this account that Brahmaji gave the entirety of knowledge about Dharma to Manu, the Swayambhu Manu, the first Manu. And Swayambhu Manu taught many students, including Bhrigu Maharshi. And the And the text that we have today as Manusmriti is the one which has been transmitted in the line of Bhrigu, in the family of Bhrigu. So it is not that somebody simply put something, redacted, interpreted, removed. It is not a haphazardly done thing. The knowledge is transmitted in a particular lineage, and there were many such lineages. Narada Smriti, what we have today, is also actually Manusmriti. It has come from Manu, but in a different lineage of transmission than than the Bhrigu transmission, right? So this one is Narada transmission, that one is Bhrigu transmission. The Narada transmission has a different abridgment. So with the passage of each yuga or something like that, passing time, the knowledge which was very big was condensed into shorter version. The 100,000 chapters were condensed into 10,000 chapters and then 1,000 chapters. Like this, 4 or 5 reductions happened in the Bhrigu family of line of transmission. And the final transmitter, as per the Narada Smriti evidence, is that somebody called Sumati Bhargava, who created a text of 4,000 verses. Sumati Bhargava, as the name says Bhargava, he is a descendant in the Bhrigu line. So that knowledge was preserved, just like the Veda is preserved. Smriti was also preserved in the family of the Bhrigus, who then condensed and redacted for the changing needs of the society. The needs of the society is changing, not the dharmic teaching, right? So the dharmic teachings, the dharma revealed in Smritis, have its basis on Veda, and as such it is eternal. So let me take up the elephant in the room, the question you have repeated many times. The question is basically this: that
my job is to show the mirror of society. So that's the whole idea of these dialogues. I mean, it's not just one. We are going to have multiple sessions where we're going to be talking about these things, because I think it's very crucial that we not avoid these questions, but rather respond to them, but respond to them with logic and with authentic references, and may make the case for the protection of dharma itself in that sense.
Yes. So to rephrase your question, the basic question is basically, is there a need to revisit Dharma Shastras today to make it more relevant to our times? That the position is argued by these people is Shastras, especially the Smritis, are contextual, based on time, Desha, Kala, Patra, and therefore they're always changing, and therefore there shouldn't be we should actually remove certain problematic portions. We can discard, we can mix and match whatever we need, and we can create a super text today as we need. And somebody
many use people, the lens of modernity to change it. And the same argument, I was very surprised, and I'm to say that the same argument was also made for in the case of Bhagavad Gita, which they said is again not a, it is anywhere. So that is why, which was an argument made to justify using it as a leadership and management textbook. So
and people say that the constitution we have is a Smriti in itself, created by Dr. Baba Sahib Ambedkar.
Yeah, it is the new Shastra.
Yeah. So all this comes from a fundamental, again, misunderstanding about Dharma Shastra, which we actually discussed. So what is the summary points that I discussed till now? It is simply this: that Dharma Shastra, the Smritis are very relevant, while Veda, the available Veda to us is a Pratyaksha Veda that is directly available to us. Smriti is Anumeya Veda. It is the inferred Veda. Smriti is the Veda which is indirectly present to us. Therefore, Smriti and the Veda have equal standing, because Smriti is also based on Veda. That is why they have equal standing, not otherwise. Now, this again raises one more question. You can ask it after this question. But it is traditionally held, even Mimamsa says that where there is a conflict between Shruti and Smriti has to be discarded. So please remind me, I will answer this question after taking
and the same argument, just funnily will also be made by many modern gurus also, where they say that where there is a conflict between Atma Pramana, Shastra Pramana, and Apta Pramana, choose only Atma Pramana sufficient. Let us discard all the Shastras as well as the Aptas. So,
No,
without taking names. So
I think modernity is all about you know discard this, discard that, discard. Okay, now seriously, now
yeah,
to answer the question whether we can or whether there's a need to revisit Dharma Shastra or whether we can modify Dharma Shastra based on whims and fancies. Okay,
and also whether we should, in fact,
we
yeah.
should. Whether we should.
Mm.
Let us assume for a moment, for the sake of argument, that we can modify Dharma Shastra. We are all intelligent people, learned in all modern Shastras and modernity. So we can modify Dharma Shastra. Let us assume. So we are assuming here for the argument's sake that we can modify Dharma Shastra, make them more relevant. So, but let us understand what is the full implication of this statement. That's that I can modify Dharma Shastra and I can make it fully relevant. If we are stating that we can modify Dharma Shastra based on our whims and fancies, which we can give any name such as changing times, utility, whatnot, it implies that A, there are three major implications. The first implication is we are basing this statement on the assumption that we have some means to know what is dharma and what is adharma, some means, some pramana other than Veda and Smriti. We have some independent means, some new way we have discovered by which reveals to us what actions leads to punyam, what actions leads to papam, and what actions can take us to swarga, heaven, and what action takes us to naraka, what actions gives us punarjanma. But do we really have such a means? Do we really have such a means? Because actions do not come to us and say, look, I am dharma, look, I am adharma. They don't speak like this. So we need to have some means to know what is dharma and what is adharma. And the tradition holds that Veda and Smritis are the means. The Manusmriti says that Veda and Smriti are like two eyes or something like that. It says that they should never be neglected, they should never be abused. They are both equally important. So if we are saying that we can modify the Dharma Shastra, we can write a new Smriti. So many people, even on the so-called Hindu side, the right wing, so-called whatever wing it is, they say that I can write a Smriti today. Any Smriti, why do we need old Smriti? We can write. So if I am accepting that it is possible to write a Smriti today, then we have to accept that we have some means to know what is Dharma other than the existing text. Because they don't want to compose a new text the way, for example, Vaidyanatha Dikshita did or Kashinatha Upadhyaya did. They do not want to write a treatise on Dharma based on Dharma Shastra, based on Veda, Itihasa, Purana. They want to write something new, completely from the scratch, without referring to anything.
And the argument they do to support their stand, because I have to say this, is that you also know who I'm referring to here, or some of the people whom I'm referring to. The argument that they make is that the Dharma Shastras are distortions of the truths that are there in the Vedas. Since they are already distorted, we will not go to the Dharma Shastras and then look at editing them, but rather we will go to the source, the fountainhead itself, which is the Vedas, and reinterpret them in the modern, using modern idiom, using the modern lens, and and reveal the truths, because as we see them. And why should we look at something that we assume? I mean, it's not an assumption, it's a position that they've taken, that this is a distorted version which pushes a Brahmanical idea, worldview of things, and therefore it is discriminatory. And therefore, why should we even look at it? That is the argument they make, and they will continue to make.
This is a very funny argument. I'll quickly address this. This is a typical Protestant argument, Right. We have actually, you won't find this kind of arguments in the long 2000, 3000 years of discussion on the Shastras among various acharyas before 200, 300 years back. This is a direct copy-paste argument we have imported from the Protestants. The way they question the Catholicism and biblical narrative and everything. Now, if we are to say that all these are Brahminical distortions and all, then Veda is also Brahminical because Vedic rishis were Brahmanas. Was not
Yeah.
Vyasa a Brahmana? You may say that Vyasa's mother was not a Brahmana, but his father was Brahmana. What about then many other Yagyavalkya and many other rishis? Were they not Brahmanas? Were they not Brahma rishis? Was not Vasishtha Brahmana?
Yeah,
Was
even Vishwamitra became a Brahma Rishi, right?
exactly.
So
Even a Vishwamitra became a Brahmana. He
Brahmana,
also became a Brahmana.
the knower of a Brahman, the person who has realized Brahman has to become a Brahmana. No,
And that is a
in one
different
sense, I mean,
definition. Or, yeah,
yeah, in one sense, we can also say that.
yeah.
So,
But I am not even taking it that sense. Vishwamitra did not become a Brahmana in that sense. He became Brahmana in the sense of he transformed his body. He
correct.
became Brahmana in the full sense of the word, right?
Mm.
The way Vasishtha was Brahmana by birth, Vishwamitra became Brahmana by tapasya. So that
And
is a different discussion. Yeah,
Vasishtha himself finally
acknowledge
acknowledges
it.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm.
So that is a different discussion, and we will
Right.
not go there. But
Yeah.
basically, then Veda itself is Brahminical because it is the Brahmanas, the Brahmana families, the Brahmana lineages, the Brahmana gotras. It is Brahmanas' heritage who have the Vedikas who have maintained, who has made available Veda today to us, and all the major commentators from Sayanacharya to ancient commentators, the Nirukta others, who are they? Were all Brahmanas. So then, how, how can you say that there is a Brahminical distortion? And now those who say that Dharma Shastras are full of distortion, so we need to go back to the source. I think this is a Arya Samaj position. They have to first prove that the Smritis are a distortion. Because we have 2000, 3000 years of intellectual tradition, the knowledge tradition. We have the Mimamsakas, the Dharma Shastras, the Dharma Shastra authors, the Itihasakaras, who all refer to each other, it's a whole tradition together. Even a Kama Shastra tradition, the commentator on a Kama Shastra text comments on Manusmriti. He is quoting Manusmriti, then Jayamangala commentary, Yashodhara. He is criticizing a certain point in Manusmriti. That is fine, but he is quoting Manusmriti. That is the important. The point is, we cannot simply say when Veda itself says that what Manu gives is medicine, how can we say that it is distortion? And some of the arguments, you might have seen my recent article, essay in Indic today on Antar Prabhava. The term Antar Prabhava has been interpreted by one of the Arya Samaji authors, Dr. Surendra Kumar, has written a modern Arya Samaji commentary on Manusmriti, wherein he has discarded half of the text as interpolation and Brahminical interpolation and all those things. But his arguments does not hold. I just analyzed one phrase, just one phrase, interpretation of one phrase, just one term of Antarprabha, and I have shown that his arguments has no basis. It is purely speculative. So this being the case, we have to first show that Dharma Shastras are interpolations. We have so much long tradition of commentators, Bhashakaras, who are interpreted them as we cannot simply throw all the tradition into dustbin simply because it is inconvenient to us today based on our rootedness in modernity, in modern education, in Western ethos and in enlightenment values. So that does not mean we cannot simply throw it away. So as I said, if we throw away Dharma Shastra, then we have to throw away Veda also. How are you directly approaching Veda? You have to approach through the commentators, or okay, fine. Now people say, I will directly read translations of Veda. Fine. But can you really understand Veda by simply throwing away all the Shadangas, the Nirukta and the Chandas and everything that are there, the Shadangas which are needed to understand Veda, and the Mimamsa Darshana, which is the most important darshana to interpret Veda. Can we, and Vedanta Darshana to interpret the Uttara Bhaga, the Upanishad portion of Veda, can we understand Veda by throwing away all of them? Some people say that I'll take only Upanishad and I discard the rest of them.
Right.
How is that possible? Your adhikaratvam to make use of Upanishadic teachings comes from the practice of the dharma that is written in the Purva Bhaga of the Veda, the dharmic portions, which gives you Chitta Shuddhi. Sureshwaracharya Naishkarma Siddhi very clearly, straightforwardly says.
Absolutely.
So,
And it
if
has
we
to be
are
a gradual
saying,
progression. Yeah, it
so
has to
if
be a
we,
gradual progression, as in you get to the Upanishads, the Vedanta portion, the reason they are at the Anta is itself is so
yeah,
you have to get to it. I mean, you can't
yeah,
straight
so
away say begin.
yeah,
This is like in management they say begin with the end in mind, so they want to begin with the
yeah. See,
end. So
people don't understand the knowledge in Hindu tradition has been transmitted in the form of an hourglass. You know, the top and bottom is wide, and in the middle it is a very narrow opening, right, in an hourglass. So now at the top we have the Veda, Akhila Veda, innumerable number of branches, very big, very large. Or even Manusmriti at the beginning, at the opening starting point, 100,000 chapters. Then it got redacted again and shortened, or Vedic branches lost, or Manusmriti was again and again redacted. So it came to a very small portion of 2,500 verses. Then again, commentary tradition started. Commentators kept adding material, and it again went on to become a wide area. And there were a lot of individual texts, standalone texts thrown into the tradition. So now Dharmashastra tradition is too large. So that is how the knowledge is transmitted. And this way is very effective because this takes into account the socio-political cultural changes happening in the society and the new challenges that emerges in society. And these challenges are addressed from the Shastric perspective. The answers to the new challenges come from the Shastras, from the entire line of tradition, from the entirety of knowledge, not from one text composed in 3rd BC or 200 BC or 8th century. The dating is immaterial. The entirety of tradition is what is matter. That entire corpus of knowledge is put into use to contextualize the teaching to a particular situation to answer them.
right.
Now, coming back, if we are to assume that we can modify and write a new text or distort it, remove it, do dismantle it, then we are assuming one implication is that we have some means to know directly what is Dharma other than Vedas and Smritis. But we don't have it. We at least don't have it. There is one means that you attain the yogic siddhi and directly perceive Dharma, directly perceive Veda. What is in Veda? But we don't have it. There is no other means. At least I don't think so. That the Medhavi intellectuals may know some other means. I don't know. Second, the second implication of the statement is dharma, adharma, punya, papa, good, bad, right, wrong, the entirety of ethics, everything. These are all conceptions of the human mind. That is the implication. If you are saying
Right.
now the times have changed, we have modernity, we are living in a modern age, we are no longer living 2000 years back, times have changed, so we need to change. So let us change our Shastras. Let us create a new Shastra. Let us discard portions which are not convenient to us and consider only those convenient as our Shastras. That means that our conception of Shastra and conception of the teachings of the Shastra, namely the Dharma, Adharma, Punya, Papa, Moksha, good, bad, all these things are creations of the human mind, creations of human imagination. Hence, we can make any changes as per our convenience. This also implies that there is no dharma, adharma in an absolute sense. There is only, these are all names given as per our convenience. Do we really want to take this relativist position? Do we really want to take this position that there is nothing called as dharma, dharma, everything is our convenience, whims and fancies? I don't think so. That means that there is nothing, the whole point of ethical endeavor into understanding what is ethics is meaningless. In fact, this was the problem encountered by even Plato. Because the sophist says that as many people are there in the world, so many definitions of morality is possible.
Right.
So he criticized this position. So the third implication of that statement is that if dharma is contextual in its very essence, then there would be as many dharma as there are people. Even a murderer or a rapist will claim to be dharmika, entitled to swarga, sukha, etc. because in his perception he is right. As a society, can we really accept this position that a rapist is a dharmika? Can we really come to accept this position that the rapist deserve to be enjoy swarga, go perhaps even attain moksha, right? We cannot. By common sense, we have this feeling, no, no, how cruel that person is, how bad that person is. We have this notion ingrained in us. We cannot accept this position. But if we accept that anybody, any Tom, Dick, and Harry can modify Dharma Shastra, can modify the existing text, Shastric text, or simply on out of thin air can produce another Smriti, see, it is not that we cannot write new treatise on Dharma. We have been writing that until 200 years back. There is one beautiful text called Stri Dharma Paddhati by Trayambaka Yajwan, which focuses specifically on Stri Dharma. There are texts like Kashinatha Upadhyaya's Dharma Sindhu and Vaidyanatha Dikshita's Smriti Muktaphala. These are all texts written in 200, 300, 400 years back. So it is not that we cannot write treatise on Dharma or even Dharma Shastra, but we cannot simply write a Smriti. See, the term Dharma Shastra can be used in two sense. In a narrow sense, in a specific technical sense, it refers to Smritis proper. But in a large sense, as any treatise of Dharma, it can refer to any text. Even Itihasa Purana is a Dharma Shastra, right?
And very interestingly, when we speak specifically of this, I think the Kanchi Paramacharya himself says in the Daivatin Kural, because he was a great proponent of protecting the Dharma Shastras and their exalted position within the Dharma. And he, in fact, he goes to the extent of saying that if the Dharma Shastras are destroyed, it will be the end of Dharma itself. And very importantly, I think he answers that question very in a very kind of, he cuts away the question saying, why can't we make changes in other things? He says, I don't have the adhikara. If he did not have the adhikara, I mean, I'm coming to the point that you are making. If he says that he does not have the adhikara, then who can have? I mean, kind of.
and interestingly, the same argument was given by Sringeri Acharyas also. I think it was Chandrasekhar Bharati Swamigal,
Right.
or even Vinay Vidyatirtha Swamigal. I don't remember the who, but they gave the same argument when somebody came to them asking for the right new Dharma Shastra. So, from the whole argument, from the whole three implications that I mentioned, and also the views of the Paramacharya and other Acharyas, it is very clear that all these attempts to create new Dharma Shastra or modify our text to make it suitable to our times, they're fool's errands, whose end result will not be good. They would cause further downfall of Hindu society into chaos and suffering. In the name of Dharma, we will write down anything that is convenient to us. What is, because see, we don't actually understand the implications of calling something as Dharma. Because it is, implication is not just about right or wrong. It is not just about ethical or non-ethical in a simply designation sense. The implications is profound. What is that? It is about karma and karma phala. What is designated of dharma must have the capacity to give certain things. It should give rise to what is called as apurva, called punya. That is the karmic merit, which is unseen, which it should give rise to the power of karmic merit, which has the power to give us, one, take us to Swarga, two, it leads to better life in Punarjanma, for three, it gives Sukham in this life as well as in next life, fourth, it leads to Chitta Shuddhi. Only that action is called as Dharma. That is, what is the definition, one of the definition of Dharma given in one of the, I think, Vaisheshika Sutra or not, it is that which leads to Abhyudaya Nishreyasa. Abhyudaya means material well-being in Arthagama in this world, as well as attaining Swarga in the next world, and Nishreyasa is attaining Moksha. If an action is not able to give that results, then that action cannot be designated as Dharma. So people don't realize this implication of saying this is Dharma, that is Adharma. We cannot take it so lightly. So this understanding that what is dharma and what is adharma, it can be known only from Shastras which reveal them in the form of Vidhi Nisheda. How? In Veda, it says that Swarga Kamo Yajeta. One who desires Swarga must perform particular yajna. So this knowledge that performing this yajna leads to Swargam, we cannot know from any other source.
Our people want to go beyond Swarga. They want to go directly to moksha. And maybe one of the reasons, one of the reasons I think people want changes is deep within, they are guilty themselves because they are not able to practice what the Shastras say. I can openly say that all that is mentioned in the Shastras is not being practiced by me or by many people. In fact, it's so very difficult to live in today's world, hold a job or do something and also practice the all of what is mentioned in the Shastras, in the sense, and maybe this difficulty in in practicing makes them say that it is impractical and and not practicable, and therefore they want to make the changes so that they want to make it easy, so that this guilt consciousness that some people have, maybe it is that also.
No,
Because
that is
there are
definitely that.
yeah.
It is definitely that. It is the guilt consciousness, and as well as the fact that most of us lead a life which has deviated so much from dharma that it is now no longer a question about not practicing some dharmas. Our life is full of adharmas.
No, the dharmikas, those who have some respect, love, attachment to the dharma, it might, this kind of an argument might come from their guilt consciousness. But there are real people who also hate the dharma itself, and these are people who will go to any extent, and this hate is what see in the burning of the Manusmriti, or the all of these things that come. For example, there are several elements within the constitution which I completely disagree with, which I feel, if I may say so, are adharmic in the sense. But I do not go out there and take it, do what these people do to the Manusmriti. So that is the so I think we have to also acknowledge that while there are some who are maybe are doing it because they feel guilty that they're not able to practice everything, there is also a large section which actually hates the dharma, and these are people who at least notionally are within the so-called Hindu fold, who continue to who are also completely against this.
See, yeah, that is true. The first group that you mentioned, those who have some affinity to the Shastras, those who have engaged in Shastras some one way or the other, perhaps through Gita or through Vedanta or something else, or through their family tradition, they celebrate festivals. They have love to the deities, but they are uncomfortable. Somewhere there is a guilt consciousness because of the deviation. But that is fine. I think, see, the fact is we have to recognize the whole teachings about yugas and everything has given to give this knowledge that, look, boss, you are living in Kali Yuga. The nature of the yuga itself is such that we live a adharmic life. We live a life of apadharma. What the emergency condition wherein dharma, the bull of dharma is standing on only one leg.
Yeah, correct, one leg. Yeah.
This perspective, when we interiorize this, then we realize that our life is going to be a struggle between too many different pulls. Basically, life is all about struggle between three pulls: dharma, artha, kama. And where if the one has that vasana for moksha, then moksha pull also will come. But basically, for most of the people, it is dharma, artha, kama pull, wherein the dharma pull is very small and artha and kama pull is, and that is fine. Krishna, what Bhagavan Krishna says in Gita, if you practice dharma even a little, even a drop, that keeps you free from great fear. Even a drop of dharma keeps you away from great fear. So, understanding this, we should try to live our life best possible way, as much in alignment with dharma as much possible. That is as simple as that. everybody everybody first of all is not competent to do everything. And nature of the Kali Yuga is such that it is not possible for us to live the life by the standards of Satya Yoga. We have to live the life, and it is not even possible for 99% of us to live the life by the standards of Kali Yuga itself.
Correct.
Right? So understanding this reality, we need to lead the life as much as possible in alignment with Dharma. That is why this Itihasa, Mahabharata, Itihasa, Puranas were taught to help us cross over, negotiate with daily challenges, because we get so many different options in front of us. We are always confused. There is a Dharma Sankata. The resolution of Dharma Sankata is helped by this Mahabharata, Itihasa, Puranas, the knowledge of that. So this does not mean, so this is the first group. The second group, I would say the second group is a lost case, because if you remember, I had written an article on Panchakosha of Hindu society or something like that, the title. So at the very core is the Siddhas and the Acharyas and everywhere who has living the Dharma as it is and have attained. And the outside of that is the practicing Hindus, some people like us for trying to our best level. We have Shraddha and all. But at the outermost is something called as nominal Hindus, political Hindus, who say that I stand for the political identity for a party or something like that. I recognize that there is a civilizational threat through our Hindu society, but their affinity stops there. And in fact, they often take the gun and fire inside the circle rather than outside the circle. Because they think that they wrongly diagnose the problem to be with the Hindus rather than with the enemies. So, and they have completely been brainwashed and taken into by the modernist values, by the modernity as a whole. So obviously they find their lives completely in dissonance with the Shastric teachings. So they cannot accept that their lives, the way they are living has problems, because they think it is best because it is giving them the temporary sukha. They are finding great pleasure in what they are doing. So they do not want to let go of their entitlements, let go of their preconceived notions, their ego, everything. So they demonize the Shastras. They need one enemy, one scapegoat to make as enemy. That is the Shastra. But returning back to our original question, so I was saying the essential principles of Dharma. The Dharma can be known from Shastras and they alone reveal them, such that we have no power to change or modify what constitutes Dharma. Because as I said, to designate something as Dharma means it must give Punyam and Swargam and everything else. But so we do not have power to say that no, this action does not give Punyam, but this action will give Punyam. We do not have power. It is not up to us to designate and decide. So the essential principles of Dharma are eternal. And they are karmically binding whether one accepts the authority or not. A murderer cannot say that I do not accept the laws that murder is a crime. Therefore, I should not be punished. Similarly, if you do adharma, you will be punished in one way or the other way. You may get away from the courts, but you cannot get away from Ishvara's judgment. Ishvara is karma phaladata. He is the giver of fruits of actions, right? So, if the Shastras are binding, it is binding only in one sense. It is not binding in the sense of there is some despotic ruler who implemented Manusmriti on all people. That never happened. It is not binding in some Abrahamic sense that there should be a church which is despotically implementing the stipulations. No, that also never happened. But the Dharma Shastra, the Smritis are binding in the sense that it reveals the knowledge about karma and karma phala. And if you do that karma, that particular karma phala is bound to come. There is no escape. But this does not mean that dharma is absolute in an Abrahamic sense. It is not. While essential principles of dharma are eternal, for example, Satya was dharma in Satya Yuga, Satya was dharma in Treta Yuga, it is dharma in Kali Yuga. Just because all of us are indulged in falsehood and lying for our convenience or for certain situations which wherein we do not have an option, does not mean that somehow the false become dharma in Kali Yuga and Satya becomes adharma. That is not so. However, the application of the essence of dharma, application of the archetype of dharma in real life are contextualized based on kala and desha and other factors. So, while dharma is eternal, it is also diverse. It is not one size fits all entity. And it is also fluid and not stagnant. People do not understand this nuance. They say that either Dharma Shastra has to be a museum, has to be a tomb in the past, or it has to be everyone can do anything based on whims and fancies. It is neither of them. Dharma is eternal, but it is fluid, not stagnant. How do we know that dharma is fluid? We have the concepts such as Yuga Dharma, like tapasya and sacrifice were best means to attain overall well-being in previous yugas. But in this yuga, Dhanam and Bhakti is the most easiest and the most important means. This does not mean that if I do tapasya in this yuga, then I cannot achieve punyam. I will. It is still dharma. But it is difficult for me to do that level of tapasya. It is easier for me to do bhakti and dhan. So it is about capability of the person. Not that the dharma of tapasya became invalid in Kali Yuga, or the dharma of yajna became invalid in Kali Yuga. They did not become invalid just because the yuga changed, just because the kala element changed. Similarly, the fluidity is with respect to varna dharma. What is dharma for Brahmana is not dharma for Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra, or anybody else. For example, alcohol. Drinking alcohol is adharma for Brahmana. It is a great papam. But this is not so for other varnas. There is no papam attached. Even they are said that it is better to avoid it. But it is nowhere said that it is adharma to them. There is no papam associated by consuming alcohol for other varnas. It is mainly for Brahman.
And that is the and that is the whole when we say that the Dharma Shastras are actually contextual. I think this is the whole aspect of it, that they have actually looked into what is relevant for a particular age and for the type of people, their mentalities, their thinking, their ideas, and therefore have provided them with the right means towards attainment of not only practicing dharma on a daily basis, but also attainment of the purusharthas in a legitimate form. I think at this would be a good point to actually take a break with regard to the first question.
Want
and
to,
then
I think we already addressed to both the questions actually.
Correct. Yeah.
So I
the
just
two
want
questions.
to,
what I meant was to end the first of the dialogues as
yes,
such. But yeah, you could
I have
finish
just
the
one, yes,
correct.
one more
Yeah,
point
yeah.
to add here. So, and it, as you said, that the rishis, as I mentioned, they are Trikala Gyanis, the past, present, and future. So the archetype they have given contains the seeds of teachings which are relevant for all the times. Which they, for example, in the Manusmriti, after teaching about all the four varnas, the Brahmana, Kshatriya, Shudra, then it teaches about apadharma, dharma for the emergency times. And it is inside this apadharma, it gives a teaching in enunciation about Varna Shankara. And Kali Yuga is by definition apadharma. And we see in Kali Yuga that Varna Shankara is a reality. So it is already addressing that Varna Shankara reality and saying, look, when there is Varna Shankara, when you do not know that you what Varna you really belong to, when you do not actually belong to any of the four Varnas, because of the Varna Shankara happened in your families for a long time or whatever it is, in your community, family, whatever, then look, for you there is very simple dharma. That is Samanya Dharma. For you, Samanya Dharma is Vishesha Dharma. You practice Satya, Ahimsa, Steya, Asteya, and Indriya Nigraha. That is, and whatever profession you do it with honesty, do it with Satya, Ahimsa, Asteya, Indriya Nigraha. That itself is your Vishesha Dharma. That itself gives you overall well-being. And that is a reality already happening. People say that I am not a Brahmana, I am not a Kshatriya, I don't do this, I don't do this. Still, I am ethical. Yes, what you are saying is not contradictory. They think that it is contradictory to Shastras. They think that we as a society have become, so now they say that now the Jati system, the profession is no longer present. So the whole Manu Dharma Shastra and all this enunciation is useless. How is it useless? The current system, fine, you don't have a profession by Jati, but you are still in professions, you're still doing your works, you still want to have attain Swarga, you still want to do Punyam and attain Swarga, and you don't want Dukkha. Then you consult Dharma Shastra. What Dharma Shastra says, considering your situation, you are in this situation of Apadharma. So if you belong to some Brahmana or Kshatriya kind of families, try to do your Swadharma like Sandhya Vandana, etc. to the best of your ability. If you do not belong to any of this family, then do Samanya Dharma, which is common to everybody. Do your profession honestly and practice Bhakti, because Bhakti is also Samanya Dharma. Practice Bhakti. You see how the Shastras are not irrelevant. What Manu says is not irrelevant. Parashara says that Manu was for Satya Yuga and Parashara is for Kali Yuga. He's correct. But this does not make Manu as irrelevant. What it is saying is Manu's standards, he provides the archetype of Dharma. That is why he is from like a Satya Yuga. So we take and Parashara Smriti is also based on Manu Smriti only. So, and Parashara already has given a Smriti for entire Kali Yuga. So why do we need why do we need a new Smriti? And we are not capable of creating a new Smriti also. Are we rishis? Our greatest acharyas, such as Paramacharyas and Shringeri acharyas, I'm sure even of other Sampradaya acharyas, they all agree that they are not rishis, Trikala Gyanis who can create a new Smriti. When they cannot, then how can we? And there is no need at all. What we actually need is a contextualization of the dharmic teachings, to address our present challenges, to guide us to negotiate with our ever-changing world. So the purpose of Dharma Shastra tradition was to achieve precisely this, and we did it till 200, 300 years ago. You know, the Manusmriti speaks about when there is a question about dharma, adharma, and then we need to convene an assembly of Veda Shastragnas, Vaidikas, and Shastragnas to discuss about that matter and decide what is the best way out. We are no longer doing it. We are going to courts. Courts have become, we are taking the secular courts as a pramana. So, the purpose of the Dharma Shastra tradition is to achieve this contextualization, the composition of Itihasa Puranas, the commentary tradition on Smritis, the independent works of Dharma, which were composed and disseminated until 18th century, they were all done to facilitate contextualization. So what we need today is to revive this Dharma Shastra tradition and bring Dharma Shastra perspective into our discussion on major issues of socio-cultural and political.
Okay, thank you. I think that's a good point to end the first of the dialogues. I must say that this is only at the beginning, and we're going to have multiple dialogues, and we're going to be addressing several other questions, if we may call them issues, and all of those things that are there, because it is extremely important that we that we address each of these things and not brush them under the carpet. It's critical to do that, because the very survival of dharma depends on the whole, and the whole dharma is actually flowered in this sense through dialogue, through discussions, and through mutual exchanges and explorations. So thank you, Nitin, for the first of the dialogues. I know that you're very busy, but we will find time to have more such dialogues, and we will keep this thing going. I think this will provide a great service to many people who are grappling with these kind of questions. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ramesh. Happy to always speak and discuss with you. Very mentally stimulating. And we should definitely take up that question on Smriti versus Shruti. Shruti versus Smriti.
Right.
In the next session, which we could not address today. I think we already spoke for more than an hour now.
More than an hour. We said we will do more, but I think the discussion led one led to the other. So yes. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Ramesh. Okay. Namaste.